Welcome to another episode of Independent Thought and Freedom, where we have conversations with some of the most interesting people around the world who are shaking up politics, society, economies, and ideas. We've had some amazing guests on this program, including the Saker, Paul Craig Roberts, Sheikh Imran Hussein, E. Michael Jones, and more. If you'd like to support us to reach our next goal of actually putting together live events where we can put together some of my best guests together on one stage, please consider becoming a monthly subscriber on Patreon. You'll find the link below. Also, if you are an author or a researcher with important ideas to share with the world and want to have a greater impact, I'm offering a free masterclass. 3 steps on how to leverage your intellectual authority to become a media personality. The link for that class is in the description as well. And now, on to this week's show. Cynthia McKinney, moving beyond right and left in seeking peace and development. What happens when the political movement you've been part of for so many years is no longer recognizable to you? What happens when, in this dramatically changing world, your previous political allies and positions are actually harmful, and people whom you have previously considered enemies are now friends? How do you throw off old ideas and categories of left and right that not only have not worked, but which are now obsolete and prevent the necessary forces from coming together? To help us answer this question, I am pleased to have on this podcast a dynamic and fiercely independent-minded woman, Ms. Cynthia McKinney. Cynthia McKinney is an American politician and activist who is an assistant professor at North-South University, Bangladesh. She has become an internationally renowned human rights activist because of her readiness to step into the line of fire in order to achieve her goals, be it in Palestine, Libya, Syria, or the Philippines. As a member of the Democratic Party, she served 6 terms in the United States House of Representatives starting from 1993. She was the first black woman elected to represent Georgia in the House. She left the Democratic Party, and in 2008 she ran as the presidential candidate of the Green Party of the United States. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome to this podcast Dr. Cynthia McKinney. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to join you and your audience. And you've actually posed probably one of the most important questions of our time, because you are absolutely correct that left and right, Democrat, Republican, liberal conservative or liberal progressive conservative, these are characterizations or sort of political delineations that don't work anymore. And
Right.
So what we've got to figure out is this new language. Now, part of this has been a progression over time, because I remember when I was trying to say some of the very same things that Donald Trump is now saying, well, people weren't ready to hear that from me.
Right.
And I obviously also did not have the language to communicate. So, for example, when I was questioning what happened on September 11th in 2001,
Yes.
so this is not like, some awakening that came 10 or 15 years later. In the moment,
That's right.
I was asking the questions.
Yeah.
And in the moment, I just posted on my Twitter and my Facebook today. I guess I should mention that my Twitter is twitter.com/Cynthia McKinney. And I invite your audience to go and join me and participate in the conversation that we're having on Twitter and on Facebook. But now Facebook is quite unusual because I've been put in Facebook jail.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm in prison in Facebook, but my son figured out a way to get me at least able to post again. So I'm posting from prison. But anyway, but now, almost 20 years later, now we've got language. So we know what fake news is. We know that we have to question everything that comes from a U.S. government official's mouth. We know automatically we don't believe it. And we just had the most recent, um, the most grotesque sort of case study is the suicide of Jeffrey Epstein in prison during a suicide watch.
That's right.
How does this happen? So
and as you're saying, this is what's so amazing about this is that they are, using the terminology of the day today, they are red pilling the whole world because there's no one who will believe that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. So anybody who was skeptical about these things before, I don't see how they can maintain their skepticism about skepticism. Skepticism is now 100% legitimate because of this thing.
That's right. And the thing that I appreciate about Donald Trump is that he's so out front with it. So people are criticizing and saying, well, he's racist. Well, as if the United States has never had a racist president before. Actually, exactly. What I want is for people to tell me when the United States did not have a racist president. Okay?
Exactly.
And
including Obama.
Absolutely, including Obama. Obama bombed more countries than I thought was possible. He bombed more countries than George W. Bush.
And killed American citizens without due process.
Absolutely, and got his Justice Department to defend the practice of U.S. president killing U.S. citizens on U.S. soil by droning them. I mean, this is unbelievable. It is absolutely unbelievable, the conditions that we face today. But I do not tire of reading comments from people who are writing to me on Facebook and Twitter, and they're telling me, oh, by the way, my Facebook is Cynthia McKinney Official. If you don't put the official in, you're going to get a fake page because there's lots of fake pages out there that have Cynthia McKinney as a name. So Cynthia McKinney Official on the Facebook page and Cynthia McKinney on the Twitter page.
I'll definitely put the links below. I'll definitely put the links below for my readers because your feed is a very, very active feed. You've always got stuff there and very interesting stuff.
Yes, I try to stay up to date, and I like I said, I now never tire of receiving these messages from people saying, well, I really believed you. I really believed them about, and I thought you were crazy. I thought you were unpatriotic. I thought you were loony. I mean, I get all kinds of messages because, of course, I was called all kinds of names in real time.
Yeah, exactly.
The challenge that I was doing was a real-time challenge to U.S. government lies.
And that bravery from where you did it, from Congress, I mean, and when the passions were so high that, you really put yourself at risk. You really did. And I mean, your bravery and courage, it's universally, universally might be too wide because you definitely do have enemies and detractors, but it is very, very, very widely acknowledged that, you've been, such a brave and courageous voice for decades,
Yes.
amazing people like Paul Craig Roberts, and so many people, admire you greatly. And let's go back to them, because I find that because as you said, it's decades you've been saying this. I know as a congresswoman in the 1990s, you used to wear your trademark gold running shoes and braided hair. Right? It's been said that you deliberately use these to symbolize your challenge to the mostly white, mostly male U.S. Congress. It sounds a lot kind of like you know what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and these sort of new breed of Democrats are kind of doing now. But you were shaking things up a long time ago.
Well, I didn't have multimillionaires backing me
That's
as
right.
the
That's right.
so-called squad do now. So I
Exactly.
don't know, I have learned that I have to follow the money. And
Yes.
so until I understand where that money comes from, because I've been in the arena, I know how hard it is to raise the money. You don't get a Justice Democrats just like that. You don't get on YouTube and then all of a sudden you get $20 million handed to you.
That's right.
So, now there's new models that are being created, but they're probably doing the same old thing. They're manufacturing consent and
Yes.
they're manufacturing the appearance of dissent.
That's
And
correct.
so, what we have to understand now, it's way more sophisticated, is who's real opposition as opposed to the contrived opposition, or
Absolutely.
as they say, the controlled opposition. So, but I was out there trying to raise money, never had enough money, but always was able to, and always had opposition. Never ran unopposed when I was doing the things that I was doing on behalf of the people, opposing the wars, writing the dissents in the congressional record. I understood that it was U.S. foreign policy that was the pernicious actor on the international stage, and that needed to be changed. I
Yep.
had studied international relations. I understood exactly what was happening, and I went there with a mission to actually change those things, those aspects, the policies. And so I was always focused on the policies, while unfortunately many of my supporters, including my supporters, but political watchers, were focused on the personalities. And so
Right.
now we understand that there's a difference between having a representative and having representation. Some people understand that now, but that's because they don't have the representation that they used to have. I just had someone contact me today telling me that they want me to run again. Well, we need you in Congress, Cynthia. I get it all of the time. And the thing
Yeah.
about it is that I get this now, these messages that are coming through on Facebook and Twitter, I get them from the people who supported my opponents, from the people who believe the media. But, this is 20 years ago. And when
Yeah.
I think about it, I was 20 years ahead of my time. But I
Absolutely.
was doing the right thing at the moment in real time. I was the one who was telling the truth. Now, unfortunately, people understand that, but it's 20 years too late.
Exactly.
Imagine what we could have done if I had been able to hold on to congressional power.
Yeah.
I would have been able to use that power. In fact, what did I just write on my Twitter feed? The Jeffrey Epstein thing.
Hmm.
And what I just wrote today is a realization that came to me, that when I was questioning Donald Rumsfeld about DynCorp and the trafficking of women and little girls,
Yeah.
and DynCorp getting Pentagon contracts. I didn't realize how close I was to the Jeffrey Epstein scandal.
Yeah. Hmm.
I didn't know it at the time, but I was that close because I was doing the whole sexual trafficking by US government contractors. That's what I was investigating under the power of a congressional office.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
was not bought, and
Hmm.
I was unpurchasable.
Yeah.
So therefore, I was going to find out who was doing it and what kind of government contracts were they getting, and
Mm.
why. As I asked Donald Rumsfeld, why were they not put in the penalty box
Yeah.
and suspended from competing for government contracts and having the government contracts that they had suspended and frozen so that they could that money would not continue to flow as long as they were uh, participating in those illegal activities. Now, you see, that's where I was going, and I
Yeah.
would have gotten to the State Department. I would have gotten to the DynCorp helicopter with Jeffrey Epstein. I would have gotten to all of that. This is amazing to me that I was so
Yeah.
close,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
and that's why they came after me with such virulence,
yes.
because
And
I was that close. I didn't
and
realize it.
exactly, and you probably didn't realize, why with such force they were after you. Why with such determination is because what you were uncovering was something so huge that,
Right.
yeah, that you were unaware of really the magnitude and the importance of, uh, the magnitude of the importance. You obviously knew it was important, but
Yes,
yeah. I mean, and I'm glad. I mean, you went there because it's. I'm really pleased we're in the same mental space and the same wavelength, because that was basically the kind of question I was going to follow up with. You were doing this before, and because similarly myself, I've been sort of active for a long time, and I was more on the left in the 1980s and 90s, and a lot of the things that were, you took real personal risks for at that time. Now it's like supported by Starbucks, and and just that alone is like, there's something wrong when the richest people and richest corporations in human history are supporting your political movement that is, ostensibly, against the system, but you're so embedded in the system. Can't you understand that there's something wrong with this picture? So here you
yes,
have these rebels, these so-called rebels, with huge, with corporate America backing them. It
that's
does.
correct. And
Yeah.
so we, if we also want to go there, what I would do is I would take people to my website,
Hmm.
and my website is allthingscynthiamckinney.com.
Right.
On that website, if they go to, I think under op-eds, they'll
Right.
be able to find a paper that I wrote. Now I got to find it myself, but
Right.
they'll be able to find the paper that I wrote on the well, basically, let me see what the Purple Revolution. Let me get the name of it. Let me
Okay.
just go and
Sure.
see if I can get the name of it. I'm sorry. I should have had this. Um, oh yeah, if
Well,
you go under Cynthia's news and
mhm.
then you go to op-eds, then
Yeah.
you will be able to find um, I've written one just yesterday that I posted on um, Kashmir, the situation in Kashmir. But
Right.
earlier, what I wrote, the name of the paper is The Purple Revolution, U.S. Hybrid Warfare Coming Home to Roost. And basically, what that paper, it started out being a paper on hybrid warfare. And I had been asked by a foreign country to make a think tank, not the country itself, but a think
Yeah.
tank in a foreign country to make a presentation about hybrid warfare. So I began to, and if you go to the academic literature, I notice you're a doctor. So does that mean you're PhD?
Yes, politics.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then you understand that you go through and you do like a literature search, and
Yep.
what you discover is that the literature is basically as fraudulent as the fake news. So
Exactly.
we got fake media, fake news, and we have fake academia.
That's
And
right.
so I go through, and everything about hybrid warfare basically is accusatory on the role of Russia
Yeah.
in
How it goes.
creating this, this new kind of warfare called hybrid warfare,
Right.
when basically, as I point out in my paper, is that you had hybrid warfare in Sun Tzu's The Art of War. So, I mean,
Absolutely.
hybrid
Absolutely.
warfare has been
Yeah.
going on ever since warfare has been going
Yeah.
on.
And
Okay, so
exactly.
yes,
Hearst and the
oh,
Spanish American War, all this stuff. I mean,
yes, yes. So anyway, so then, and I always look at the U.S. policy
Mhm.
because the U.S. is so big, and what I used to say when I was in the Congress is that all roads lead to Washington, D.C. It doesn't
Right.
matter what your issue is, it
Yeah.
is at one point being debated or has been debated or is funded from Washington, D.C. So I
Absolutely.
wrote this paper called The Purple Revolution when I was looking at the Democratic Party and what was going on with this so-called purple revolution, and basically this being an example of hybrid warfare. um, the what did I want to call it, U.S. hybrid warfare coming home to roost.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so um,
Malcolm
basically,
X's famous phrase. Yeah. Chickens coming
oh,
home to roost.
that's
Yeah.
right. Chickens coming home to roost. That's right. So then what I'm looked at is, now I'm trying to find the darn thing. I can't find the darn paper, but um, I look at
And
migration.
just to clarify, the Purple Revolution is supposed to be what, bipartisan, red and blue or something? Is
Oh,
that
the purple revolution. Yes, it's the red. It's the blending of the red and the blue after the 2016 Democratic Party lost to Donald Trump.
oh
Remember that election night, Hillary Clinton wore purple, and
oh
Democrats have been wearing purple ever since.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And well, because this is interesting about the primaries, because I mean the 2016 Republican primaries were the most exciting thing in American politics that I witnessed in my lifetime, I would say. And it was just amazing the way Donald Trump ripped both the Democratic
Mhm.
Party and the Republican Party. He was more savage on the Republicans than the Democrats ever were. You know,
Yes, that's
accusing
exactly right.
accusing Jeb Bush on stage of his brother lying about Iraq, and I mean, and talking about the CIA and FBI and all their covert operations around the world. I could not believe I was hearing this from a U.S. presidential candidate. I was just amazed.
I know, and he actually talked about, he said working class in his
Yes,
campaign. He said
exactly.
working class. So so I wrote about, in this Purple Revolution paper, I wrote, well, Purple Revolution hybrid warfare paper. I wrote about the 2016 presidential campaign as an example perhaps of hybrid warfare being turned inside against the people of the US. And
Right.
what I looked at was George Soros's
Open society.
intervention
Yeah.
into um, uh, uh, into that whole process.
Right.
So basically, what I uh, had an example of was like a case study of the
Hmm.
European George Soros weaponizing migration as an
Right.
example of what George Soros was up to. And
Hmm.
then I gave all of the examples of George Soros's support for various migrant organizations.
Yeah.
Um, and then what I did was I went to and looked at George Soros's involvement in US politics. So it goes from the weaponization of migration to this vast NGO, or at least studying this vast NGO network that affects US policy. That's
Yeah.
what I did, and that's what I discovered.
Let's discuss this a little bit more in depth because I wanted to ask you about what you thought of the Democratic primaries right now because I think that, that's kind of, it's not as exciting as the 2016 Republican one, but it is exciting, and I love Tulsi in particular. Um, I'd like to hear your views on that. But you mentioned migration, and this is very important. And for a number of reasons, back to the kind of theme I was seeing at the beginning in terms of left, right, and all that, because the Democrats are obsessed with this open borders, migration. Like everything is, they're going on this, and the other thing is this transsexual kind of stuff. We can deal with that later, but this is one of their main obsessions, the migration thing, and it's almost like a litmus test for your progressive credentials or on how compassionate you are to migrants, and if somehow you don't display the 100% open borders policy that they're pushing, somehow you're an evil fascist. And so your position as someone who is genuinely for real global social justice, you obviously have a critique of this whole migrant issue that somehow they're not seeing on the Democratic side. Can you sort of elaborate on your position? How you're not coming from a right wing, um, position. Corporate. Well, actually, the corporations love migrants. But to explain how you reached this position when it seems in the contemporary discourse that it's so anti-left, but and this is why the whole discourse is so screwed up. So please elaborate.
Well, basically, what I did was I just looked at the Open Society Institute or Open Society Foundation money, and where where does that kind of gravitate to? And so I would have to quote an Italian research paper that found literally that every one of the NGOs that had a ship that was
Right.
taking migrants from West Asia to North Africa into Europe were financed by George Soros, every one of
Yes,
them.
that's
So
this is a
now
huge human trafficking exercise. That's what
it's
this
a
migration so-called crisis is.
that's
You're right.
exactly right. That's exactly right. And we have to understand what's happening. So now the Democrats who have taken a potload of money from George Soros, George
Yeah.
Soros just gave, I think it was uh, I can't remember now. Is it 5 million he just put in a pot for the 2020 presidential Democratic Party presidential nominee.
Okay.
And that just happened maybe 2 days ago. But the Democrats are now reflecting the policy priorities of George Soros.
That's right.
That's clearly what's happening.
Wow.
And so
When would you say that happened? What year would you say that happened?
well, what I looked at was 2016.
Okay.
And so I could go from sort of 2016 to 2018
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
what I'm looking at.
I think he was definitely entrenched by 2016.
So like what I've got here, 2000. So then in 2018 is when I looked at those would have been the what people call the by-election or the 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 midterm election.
Yeah.
So I have here I'm just trying to see here. I have the, I'm just trying to see. I have a recitation that I have
Right.
compiled here of all of the things. I'm just trying to find. Yeah, 2018 elections. Okay, here it is. Soros funded PAC donation of 1.5 million to support an African American district attorney candidate in San Diego, more than 1 million to support the African American Democratic nominee for governor of Georgia, more than 1 million to support the African American Democratic nominee for governor of Florida, support for Ayanna Pressley, Democratic nominee for U.S. representative in Massachusetts, ACLU, whose members participated in the Cancel Kavanaugh protest. So I go right down the line. It's millions and millions of dollars
Yeah.
that have been put into one way or another at all of the various levels of the Democratic Party. And so this is important. And when the
Yeah. And
Democratic
that's
Party
on your
is
site, right?
100,
That's on your website?
this is the research paper that I did. Yes, and
Right.
it's on my
Good.
website.
Yeah, that's important info. We need to check that out.
Yes, people need to check it out because I mean, if you get $133 million, which is what Black Lives Matter
Wow.
is supposed to have picked up, George Soros, a contributor to a $50 million fund created by 7 to 10 wealthy donors to dig dirt on President Trump. I mean, I've just listed all of
Yeah.
these things, and so now if we want to talk about what kind of integrity there is in the system, clearly, when you hear Democrats pocketing this kind of money and then
Uh,
singing the song of the person that provides the money, this means that there's no integrity in our system at all,
that's right.
and
Bought
and
and paid for.
that's what we've got to get to the bottom of.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, now, as a former, Democrat, a congresswoman and a former presidential candidate yourself, what do you have? Uh, you know, you just expressed your view about the Democratic Party being, bought and paid for and singing Soros's praise, and that's absolutely correct. But is there anything positive that you're seeing about the Democratic primaries right now? Anything you find exciting? A little glimmer of hope anywhere?
Well, because I understand how the system works, I really am not even paying attention to them,
Yeah, yeah,
because it's sort of like the minstrel show of
yeah. It is.
of the season.
Yeah,
And the
but
reason I say that
huh?
is because by and large, it doesn't really matter if you're a Democrat or if you're a Republican. They give you once you're in Washington, D.C., they give you a book, and Democrats have the same book, Republicans have the
Yeah,
same book, and they both go to the same people and ask them for money.
and I think
So now,
we're
if
seeing that with
that,
Trump,
if
aren't we? Do you agree? We're seeing that with Trump because his 2016 campaign, I was so hopeful, and this kind of saber rattling with Iran and Venezuela, and all the people in the State Department and Bolton. I just find it I find that very depressing in a sense that I expected much more. Maybe I was too idealistic. I don't know, but it
No, no,
seemed like
no,
the
no,
deep state
no.
was there.
What I would say is, let's look at the strategy. Let's look at the overall strategy, and then let's look at these tactics. Okay, so the strategy is that we're going to extricate ourselves from these wars because that was a campaign promise.
Right? Absolutely.
And so that's what got some people excited, the anti-war people who were able to see through a lot of, the Democratic Party hype were excited that because, well, maybe there won't be any wars. And much to the dismay of the anti-war crowd, of which I am a part,
Yeah.
the wars continue, except that we've got signals, and these are more than what any Democratic president has done.
You're
For
right.
example, he said that he would not risk peace for politics,
Yeah.
and then began the personal relationship with Kim Jong-un, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No,
now
that was very important. I agree.
that's important. He also said that he didn't trust his national security team.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
also very important
Absolutely
because
important.
these are the people. So he says he's going to drain the swamp, but he goes inside the swamp and he actually gets people from the swamp. And
Yes.
then he says, well, I don't trust them.
That's right.
And
That's right.
now when it comes, and of course he doesn't trust them. And I don't either.
Yeah.
So then what, and this keeps happening over and over again. Now on my Twitter feed, if someone wants to go back and look at non-swamp alternatives to the appointments that Trump made, you will find them there. Because, for example, when I understood that, well, he's going to get some generals, and so then no matter how much I prefer civilian control, um, as a key concept for the stewardship of the U.S. military in particular, Trump is not there. And
Yeah.
so then I said, okay, well, then what can we do in terms of these appointments that satisfies his penchant and at the same time drains the swamp? And so then what I did was I looked at generals who had done the right thing in the face of criticism and who could easily, where the easier path would have been for them to sell out. Now,
Yeah.
there's lots of sellout generals,
Mm-hmm.
but we have only a few who did the right thing.
Yes.
One of those generals is General Taguba from the Philippines,
Okay.
who was charged with writing the report on Abu Ghraib. And basically, he said, I messed up either way I go. If I tell the truth, I'm messed up. If I tell a lie, I'm messed up. So his choice was to tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And then another one of those generals that I found and recommended on the Twitter feed was Honore, who went into New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina and cleaned that place up. And so I said, okay, these are generals who could have done something. They could have joined the swamp, but they did not. They chose
Yeah.
to drain the swamp in their particular little area of jurisdiction. These are the kinds of people that someone who truly wants to drain the swamp should pick. Okay, but now also understanding that we've got several factions of the deep state that are fighting each other, well, maybe you give the appearance of giving them a free hand, but what happens is they reliably go so far that they expose themselves.
Yeah, yeah. Like giving them enough rope to hang themselves, basically.
Yeah, so when Bolton was, remember with the whole Venezuela thing,
Yeah.
Bolton went all the way, and then Trump said, well, I don't understand what they're trying to do with
Yeah, yeah,
Venezuela.
yeah, 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 yeah. It's
So he undercut Bolton. That doesn't mean that Bolton is going to stop, but
yeah.
it means that
His
then
credibility is shot.
that's right. We know that the head guy isn't on that train.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened with Iran. But of course, the stakes are so much higher with Iran because
Yeah.
these guys are rabid
That's
and
right.
they want a war.
Mm-hmm.
So what Trump did was he named the interlocutor, which now Bolton has already destroyed. That's why Trump has no choice but to do personal diplomacy, because Bolton, remember, North Korea was on the verge of signing, and then Bolton comes up with his blustery, perverted self, and then just destroys the possibility of peace. But Trump then engages with the personal diplomacy, and at least the war games have ceased, and that's a good thing.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
so now with Iran, Trump has named Rand Paul as the conduit. What does that mean?
Oh, I
It
wasn't
means
aware
that
of
no
that.
one has the ear of what the president actually is saying to the Iranians other than Rand Paul. And for the purposes of peace, I don't agree with everything that Rand Paul
Oh,
says,
yeah. But
but
in terms
we
of
can
foreign policy,
when it comes, yeah, that's right. When it comes to these wars, we know he's not on board.
that's
And
right.
that's who Trump chose. So that's a good sign. And
It
that's a
is.
signal.
It is.
One of the things that I did was,
You're making me feel hopeful, Cynthia. That's
oh,
great.
okay. I just want to provide some evidence, and it might not amount to a hill of beans, but it might mean something.
That's
And
right. That's
so
right.
I'm not one of those persons that's going to ignore evidence that I think has the potential of being significant. So, for example, we've got Elliot Abrams running the show for Latin America, and we know he's a neocon. He's
Yeah,
just, one of the worst sorts,
that's right.
along with Bolton.
Mm-hmm.
But so what I did was I check Trump's Twitter feed every morning, because that's where you find out who got fired and who got hired,
That's
right?
right. Yeah,
It's most unusual, and I love it. I
me too.
love that he's on Twitter.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I went to his Twitter feed and I searched. I wanted to see if the choice of Elliot Abrams was the choice of Donald Trump. Donald Trump does not mention Elliot Abrams not in one tweet.
You're right. You're right. That's true. That's an important fact. You're right. He's
So,
never done
so
so.
that's right. So now what does that tell me? It tells me that Pence, Pompeo, Bolton are all sort of radical free agents, and
Yes.
they have the ability to operate under color of office.
Mm-hmm.
However, Trump, I don't think Trump is going to uh, give them the okay for war.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what this is telling me.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I think that because the pattern is clear. He's allowed them to go to the brink. He's allowed everybody to just,
Yes.
be on the doorstep with the gun locked, loaded, about to kick it in, and then he says, "You know what, guys? Let's not do this." And then
That's
and
right.
it's like every single time, and he's just doing it over and over again.
He does
Uh,
it every time. So, like,
yeah.
what was the last thing he did? He threatened the Europeans to unleash Daesh on them.
Yes.
So now that's what does that mean? It
Mhm.
means the US controls Daesh. Well, we know
That's right.
that.
Yeah.
But now we know it. I mean, we know it
Yes.
in capital letters.
Correct. Correct.
And this is important. These things
Is
are all very important.
because it's never been said outside of the circles that you and I might be reading or whatever like that, read
Right.
radical. And now a president of the United States is saying this from his Twitter feed.
From his
That's the most
Twitter feed.
hilarious thing.
That's right. So I think it's marvelous. We have not had this kind of transparency in the public policy arena since WikiLeaks stopped producing documents.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
we're getting it directly, and for that,
And
I say there's a lot of material here. There's a lot of material.
it is.
So, and this is why to go back to what I was saying is to characterize academia as fake as well.
Yeah.
And this
Because they're
whole
funded by the same corporations and sources, So yeah, of course.
exactly. So, like my thing is COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program.
Hmm.
And how, people who are so outraged about what the FBI did, getting involved in the 2016 election,
Yeah.
supporting Hillary Clinton. It's
Mhm.
not the first time. It's
Exactly.
not the first time. And we've got the original US government documents. But can you find analysis of those documents in academia in the so-called peer-reviewed literature? No, you cannot.
That's
I
right.
mean,
That's
there's
right.
probably a handful. I've literally done the search because I
Hmm.
did the search for my literature review for my dissertation, and that was in 2015. So, and I
Yeah,
know that nobody's done anything on COINTELPRO since then. I
that's right.
couldn't even use the WikiLeaks. I had to take the WikiLeaks documents out of my dissertation. So I know they
Wow.
haven't done it,
Wow.
which
Wow.
is a whole
You
nother
have to
issue.
take it out because they said it wasn't why did you have to take it out?
I had to take the WikiLeaks documents out of my dissertation because Obama was prosecuting Barrett Brown, and I was using the exact same references. Barrett Brown had written he's a journalist, and he's a journalist who's very close to the anonymous community.
Right.
And so he had used the exact same links in an article. And I use, of course, writing a dissertation, I use a whole lot more, but I had also used the exact same links that he had used.
Yeah.
And he was prosecuted, put in prison, and the librarian who was in charge of sort of like the stylistic part of the dissertation just
Yeah.
basically freaked out and said, "Oh my gosh," because it was under Obama when they were keeping tabs on who was checking what books out of the library and all that sort of
Yes.
stuff.
Yes.
And we did a search and we found that there was only in the history of WikiLeaks, there was only one dissertation that had referenced WikiLeaks documents. That was a Harvard University dissertation that was sealed.
Right. Right. Okay.
So there
So
was
so
no
it was
public dissertation.
kind of out of fear, because of what? Because of
So
Barry Brown.
the librarian felt that there was going to be a court case. She was going to be, she would have to get
Right.
lawyers. They
Right.
put her in prison like they had done
Yeah.
um, Barrett Brown. It was more on her than it was on me. She was,
Yeah.
and so then she is the one that went to my chairman and, said this could pose liability for the university and, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah.
No, yeah, I know what it's like in those environments, and yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you can't. I mean, it prevents you from getting at the truth, And these are the institutions that are supposed to be, I mean, when you take the academy, and I mean, you take it to the roots of Plato and Aristotle and whatnot. I mean, you know, that was real search for truth. What they call the academy now is certainly not a place that you're going to find that, is it?
No, you're definitely not going to find that. And so when I asked at my, during the coursework of my dissertation, I asked, well, who is the academy? And they said, well, we don't know. So you've got a group of people cloistered in a room. You don't know who they are, but they are the final determinant of what's knowledge and what's not knowledge. I don't like that model. That's not for me. And so like I'm over here and I'm trying to decolonize these people and they want to go and do the same thing. So I say, okay, instead of going to the European, particularly the UK journals, why not create your own peer-reviewed journal and have them pay you if you got to monetize it? But I don't even agree with monetizing. So there's a lot of things that's wrong. The so-called academy is not yet been decolonized, and you've got a lot of PhDs that are. I was just saying, and I don't know if you can hear me or not because
I
now
can.
you can. Okay, so basically, just to make it short, what I was just ranting
Hmm.
about the peer review process and how I think it was Edward Said that talked about mimicry. And so
Yeah.
basically what you have are these universities in what's in the so-called third world, in the formerly colonized world, that are
Yeah.
just mimicking what the
That's right.
colonial institutions do,
Absolutely.
and seeking, rather than building their own and then having others come to us, what they seem to be doing is going to the former colonial masters and begging them, oh, please publish our papers
That's
and
right.
validate our knowledge. And
That's
that's
right.
just
Exactly.
absolutely ridiculous.
Absolutely. I'm a 1000% with you there. Yeah.
So anyway, that's all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great, great. Yeah, because and it's interesting because I know you were talking about developing an alternative scholarship and stuff, and you're in Bangladesh now, because I want to tie this whole thing in, because I mean I can talk to you for hours and hours and hours, but so but instead of speaking on each of these details, about which there's so many fascinating things to talk about, I want to kind of to step back and put it in a broader perspective. And there's two things I want to talk about in terms of how you made your transformation from, I guess from the Democratic Party, the conventional left, although you were never a conventional person, but you made allies there, and that's fine. I mean, we all start. I did the same thing and stuff, and then you made this transformation, and part of the stuff that I think is so interesting in your story is your time in Jamaica. I think
Oh
that's
my
important.
gosh.
Yeah, because I was in Jamaica in the early 90s, and I think you were there in the 80s, and so
Yes.
and I would imagine that would have had a lot to do with you broadening your perspective. And then also, I think the whole civil rights issue in the States, I think, is so rich and and it is not mined properly. It is now become a cliche when in fact there's so many things about that process that undermines the whole political narrative, in terms of, left and right, and because the Democrats were the segregationists, right? They were the ones who, the Bull Connors and the George Wallaces and the people who were filibustering the civil rights legislation, and this kind of stuff is forgotten, like how James Meredith or Zora Neale Hurston were, such strong Republicans, and the and so so this shift from left to right to left, from Democrat to Republican to back to, this has been happening a lot in history, and so I'm interested in how these experiences may have been part of your broadening and becoming, so independent-minded, escaping the right and left paradigm. So if you can take off on there, I think you'd probably have a lot to say. I don't need to guide you much.
Yeah, I think that's another show. But what I can say, just in the limited amount of time that we have now, is that I took a trip to Europe, and I went with a friend of mine who is, like he claims that he's like a communist, kind of guy.
Yeah.
And so I went with him. He's Italian American, and he had never been to Italy.
Right.
And because of, sort of the things that we did not get to talk about that we can talk about next time.
Yeah.
When you take a stand, then things happen.
Yeah.
And so I ended up taking my son out of the U.S. and putting him in school overseas. And he went to high school in Europe.
Okay.
He went to high school in Italy. And that was not because it was a fashionable thing to do. It was because it was right after September 11th. I had made those comments, and it was dangerous for me and for him. And the cowards were picking on my,
Yeah.
well, yeah. So anyway, that's a whole nother story.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so when the Yellow Vest movement started, I immediately said, I'm a social movement person. So I said, okay, let me take a look at Yellow Vest. I looked at them. They had a 25-point platform. Now it's become 26. I teach in the business school. I teach entrepreneurship, leadership, and organizational development and change. And so there's a lot of change theory in there. Yeah. But then over in political science, I teach introduction to political science. So that's, just the Paul 101.
Right.
And I teach them about a little bit about transformational leadership and making change as well. So anyway, now I forgot where I was
heading with it. You're talking about your son going to Italy, and yeah.
Yeah. So my friend goes to. This is to explain why I was interested in the Yellow Vest, and so the 25 points. I said, wait a minute, because I'm actually going to write a book about this too. You might want to join me. I don't know what kind of writing you do, but you might want to join in this. But I was looking at Marine Le Pen.
Yes.
And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out, you see, like you said, well, the civil rights movement, all of the civil rightsers were Republicans. Well, there was a reason for that. And it's not that they changed, it's that those political parties changed.
Yeah.
It's not that the principles or the values changed. So I try to stick to the values and I go where my values take me.
That's right.
So when it comes to um, I wrote 3 books. Well, 2 of them I edited. Okay. So one of them, the most recent one, is how the U.S. creates S-hole. Remember what Donald Trump said?
Well, what he allegedly said, and what CNN and all of them say all the time with glee.
Yes, that's right. So he said it. I said I'm going to capitalize on it. A guy, actually, was not my idea, but it was one of my cyberspace friends said, Cynthia, this is right down your alley. And I said, you're absolutely right. I took it to Clarity Press and they said, hey, we can run with that. Yeah. So anyway, I'm writing my chapter on, I did my chapter in that book on Somalia. And I don't know how I got into it, but maybe it was in, I wrote about it in the introduction. I can't remember now, but the whole West Africa currency issue with France. Mm-hmm. So I ended up doing the research on that. And what I discovered is that that's just total slavery. Yeah. And the only reason France even semi-exists is because it's still in the Africans blind on many different levels. But this is that monetary, the currency front. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I've been listening to Jean-Marie Le Pen for a long time because I was listening to Dieudonné and following his whole travails. Right. And so then Marine Le Pen was the only one of the candidates who said, we'll get rid of the CFA franc, whatever.
Yes. So
now she's the only one who's saying it.
Exactly.
Do you want slavery, currency slavery, or do you want freedom?
That's right.
So now, if you want freedom, are you going to pay attention to the fact that it's Marine Le Pen that's saying it? Or are you going to vote your interest?
Exactly.
And so what I've realized is that particularly in Europe, the people are so tied into I'm a this, I'm a that, can't, that they are not nimble enough to intellectually nimble enough to understand what the interest is and then to follow the values and the interest.
I suspect you might have the same sort of feeling towards Salvini. I certainly do.
Yes.
I mean, and all, all my former friends, on the left, when I say former, it's like I'm talking decades ago because I left it so long ago. But I mean, but as you say, it's the same values I have. It's for ordinary people. It's anti-imperialist. And you know what? I have found that, on the American right, they are far more anti-imperialist and anti-corporatist than they are on the American left, for example,
That's right. That's right.
It's just amazing. Yeah. And I know that there's so many juicy details I want to dig into your whole history and story about these things, but I know I've kept you for a while now.
Yes, that's right. And I'm literally dripping because I'm in a very hot room, but the acoustics is really good. So
okay, yeah. Is it still monsoon? Yeah, is it a monsoon season there in Bangladesh?
Yes, it's monsoon season. So if we can sort of
Wrap up,
Uh,
yeah, yeah,
Apple,
yeah,
then I can go into another room and at least because I if this is like really I'm
yeah,
just
yeah, sure.
really
Okay.
wet
Well, I suppose I would just ask this time. I usually have a nice series of closing questions, but I'll just leave it at one to have mercy on you, which is, if you want, what would you say your main message is that you want to put out to the world? And I suppose especially to young people who might be listening to this podcast, who want to make positive changes, and they might be confused about all these issues, or they might be brainwashed by the media, but they feel something is not right, not aligned properly. Huh? What would be your advice? What's your message?
Well, even that is more involved than I care to get at this
Yes,
point.
exactly.
So basically, what I'll just say is stay tuned to when Dr. Kirk has me on his show again, and then we'll go into
Yeah.
that in more detail.
All right, that's not a problem. Cynthia, thank you so much, not only for this interview, which I enjoyed thoroughly and making the connection, but for all your work that you've done for decades and decades. And you've just been an outstanding, inspiring leader and pathbreaker, and your bravery, your courage, your inspiration, your example, it's just amazing. I admire you very much, and I wish you greater and greater success in all your activities.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Right, right. Well, that's all for Independent Thought and Freedom this week. Please join us again next week. And in the meanwhile, make sure you subscribe, leave me a rating, like and share this podcast with your friends. Thanks, and bye for now.